These people that somehow get much bigger than the thing that they're a part of and somehow make careers out of things that seem nearly impossible, like making.
You are now listening to Male Worship Radio.
Let's start with the skateboarding thing first. How about that?
Okay, yeah.
Here's will be my skateboarding observation of the day, which is that Mike Vallely is back having pro models on Powell for the 5th or 6th time in his career. And there's like this little video, and like his new pro board is the like bug board that he famously rejected as his pro model back in 1988. For some reason decided that he wanted that bug board now as one of his pro models. So they're doing like the elephant and the bug. Okay, so here's the first thing. He is in his garage, goes through these boxes, and it's like, oh, here's the board I skated in public domain, like his pro model board. Like he had the actual board still that he skated. And then he goes through and like with it, he's like, here's the prototype of the bug board that I rejected. And it's like the actual board, you know what I mean? It's not like the reproduction or whatever. He's like going through and like showing these couple of things to explain it. And he's got like color proofs of like the original elephant board with like different versions of it and stuff. So he's kept everything. And, you know, he's had somehow a skate career since 1986, more or less nonstop. There's been times where he's been like not taken super seriously or having a hard time getting like a footwear sponsor or something like that. But in general, he's had like an insanely long career, especially for being a notoriously difficult person to deal with. There's two things about this that I find really interesting. So his 9 Club, have you seen his 9 Club?
Yeah.
But the first time he's on the 9 Club is 5.5 hours, and they don't even get past the first year that he was skateboarding. They don't even get to the point of him officially being on Powell, if I'm not mistaken, and never mind being like one of the first big dudes on World Industries, or being essentially like a fashion icon because of public domain, you know, like everyone dressed like Mike V for a while. 5.5 hours for him to talk about 3 formative experiences, and then he keeps all his stuff. And there's this comparison, which is Dominick Fernow, the noise artist that does like Hospital Productions and does that project Prurient. He had this interview on Noise Extra, the Noise Extra podcast. That was about 3 hours long. And he only got to, in the conversation, the first bad noise tape he made and tried to get Ron Lessard from RRR Records to listen to it. And the guy was like, this isn't good. So what I like realized maybe is these people that somehow get much bigger than the thing that they're a part of and somehow make careers out of things that seem nearly impossible, like making limited edition harsh noise tapes. They have this insane self-mythologizing tendency. I don't think they do it on purpose. I think it's just the kind of people they are, but they end up creating a mythology around themselves that ends up being their brand. And Mike V is still doing it now by taking the graphic he rejected in 1988 and making that his new pro model now that he's back with Powell. It's just an observation that I have.
Yeah.
Self-important.
I didn't know he was back with Powell. That's interesting. But I agree with your observation. But it's also kind of a cool move in a way because he's rejected it the first time, and it's a cool graphic. It is in true Mike V fashion because it makes a good story.
No, I mean, I wish I had the self-mythologizing gene.
I might a little bit internally. Like I do sometimes, but my life is so kind of intense.
I think Jamie Thomas, he has it a bit too.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a bigger than life figure.
It maybe to the point of the topic, and maybe for an artist to sort of capitulate themselves forward and using the word success broadly, but into like the next realm of artistic realization. Maybe it does take some degree of self-mythology or something. Like, again, maybe Mike V is a really good example. He's like
a model.
Yeah, I mean, he's cheesy on some level, but like he's also very inspiring. Like that 5 Hour 9 Club was pretty epic, I gotta admit. I don't know. I think that's where like I think he relates to like obviously he's into hardcore, but like he seems to be very much like a hardcore kind of mentality towards skating. To speak to his longevity of career, I think he's used that.
And I will agree that even if I in general look at that 9 Club as being a little absurd, that particular episode, I do agree that it was kind of mesmerizing. And
Yeah.
I did listen to the entire thing.
Yeah,
which was too much.
It was like 2 or 3 sittings for me to finish it, but I definitely.
Oh, it took me a while. Yeah.
You know, same with the Jason Lee one, but that was a little different because he's pretty humble, I think.
He's very, he does, especially given the stuff that he's done, he is very down to earth. And the fact that, like, I don't know if you're ever, like, if you can hear anybody feel like Mike V is my favorite skater, or like Mike V has the best kickflip. For Jason Lee is like so revered, and he's like the person that gets rediscovered. That somebody sees like a clip of him on Instagram, like a tray flip from a visual sound, and is like, "Oh, who's that?"
I always knew it, but I'm realizing kind of in a new way, him and Templeton, how formative they were for street skating, but in specific tricks too. Obviously, Templeton, it was kind of mind-boggling, like the
impossibles and the blunt slides, everything.
Yeah, all that sort of just kind of like just taking it to this weird new level, and the 1-foots and shit that were maybe kind of like temporary. But Templeton and Jason Lee just seem like so pivotal for that 80s to 90s street shift.
And it's crazy. They were pivotal in these like shifts, but at the same time, when they turned pro in the era of egg-shaped boards, rails on boards, you know, like Jason Lee wearing, I can't remember, it's like a Venture ad maybe. He's got like the kind of plaid ridiculous pants on that like skate clothing companies made at the time. He's doing like a Japan to fakie on a mini ramp. And the Cat in the Hat board, I think it is. And the board's got rails on it still. You know what I mean? So it's pre that Mike V board. And like same with Ed Templeton doing like 1-foot back Smiths on like that little tiny Huntington high rail that's probably like a 3-stair for their important stuff to be years and years later.
Yeah.
Like Welcome to Hell, or with Jason Lee, like a Visual Sound. Like I guess the Visual Sound's only in 1994, but he probably went pro in 19...
It's kind of interesting though, because I think Jason Lee and Templeton are like 89 into 90 kind of thing. But in any case, like those two dudes, like Ed Templeton and Jason Lee, big deal. But you're right. Like I guess it was like way later, the stuff that they did that was so like sort of like Welcome to Hell. And
I mean a Visual Sound. I mean like everyone loves a Visual Sound.
Yeah, it's an amazing video. Yeah.
Now, sure. like his entire part holds up now.
Okay, maybe that's why I'm not as into like skate videos or skate clips as much these days, but maybe I'm not paying enough attention. But like that early 90s era, there was a lot of examples of just sort of more experimental approaches to making a skate video, and like a Visual Sound's definitely, I think, a high watermark for that. Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, if we're going to relate to this, I mean, maybe we keep relating it to the creative thing. That's where all the rich stuff from skateboarding has spawned off into the world anyway. I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan of the Beautiful Losers sort of, I mean, we've talked about Barry McGee and stuff, and a lot of that stuff, it's like good and bad, but like where skateboarding is about skateboarding, but skateboarding's real importance in terms of how it relates to the rest of the world is the way it maybe not influences, but like impacts like aspects of like art and culture, I think is, I mean, you could say that in the 80s with just like weird, cheesy neon colors and like Vision and all that stuff and how that, you know, but for us, I feel like it was, for me, it's like the art stuff and like Templeton too, you know.
There's like 2 or 3 interesting tangents to jump from this. One thing was when we were talking about the Vallely and the storytelling, the self-mythologizing and whatnot, and essentially creating memes about yourself in a level like memes at a very kind of pure linguistic level, not like memes, but like idea viruses. You haven't seen it yet, but you know, like we're working on like a top 10 list of the week. One of the things I had in the top 10 list was the movie Heat. And I was thinking about, like, I saw Heat in theaters in 1995, and I may have seen it one other time on video at some point in the 90s, but I haven't seen it since then. So the only recollections I have about it are that it's like really very good. That's all. And then everything else is these little ideas that people use to describe something that don't describe it at all. So like with Heat, it's like, oh, it's the first time that De Niro and Pacino share the screen, or this firefight that's so choreographed and well documented that the Marines use it as a training video for how to behave in a firefight, or how they actually shot on LAX during flight times, the thing that they couldn't do 5 years later because of 9/11 or whatever. So going at like watching the movie again, like I've watched it twice in the last couple months, those are the things that you remember, these like weird little bits of story that if the thing is good, those are told as ways of explaining why it's good, but they don't explain why it's good, because like De Niro and Pacino could be in a terrible movie together. That doesn't mean the movie is good. And just because they had a good firefight, I mean, Waterworld Pie had very realistic watery stunts, and it's a massive debacle. You know what I mean? So the thing around like the stories is so important for whatever longevity. You know, like anything that's like has longevity tends to have stories around it, even if it's something like the Velvet Underground, and that quote about how, you know, the Velvet Underground had whatever 500 fans, but every single one of them started a band. And then you go like, oh, okay, so that translates to this is very important. And like Mike V's thing, like if you never knew anything about Mike V and you saw that video, you'd be like, oh, this guy's a big deal and he's very important. Even if he was like a random dude that disappeared off the face of the planet, the way you'd interpret that video because of like the storytelling is like that it's important. There is a thing to whether it be skateboarding or being an artist that, you know, all the important art tends to have these stories that travel with it. The stories don't tell you why the art's important. The stories travel because it was important, but because they travel, they solidify the importance of the thing. It'd be funny if in art school that's what they taught you. Like if instead of like coming up with like fucking quoting Foucault to justify what you did, if they were like, no, you need to come up with a better story. Like you're either the first person to do this, or you did it the most, or you did it the least.
Shit, I mean,
but if they were like, if you're gonna quote the critical theory, then quote all the critical theory and be like the most critical theory oriented artist ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's to a certain level, every important work that's in the canon in art history, on some level, was the artist convincing themselves of some kind of story around the thing. The Duchamp's urinal. I mean, it's arguable with some stuff, more so. Yeah, I mean, the mythology of the artist, though, too, like, is completely inherent to, like, 20th century art. It's probably why we like people like Frank Stella and Larry Poons more, because they're not so concerned with that stuff. But the generation just prior to them, like, you know, the abstract expressionists were a little bit wrapped up in their own mythology. That is kind of the way artists tend to be, I think. Maybe I can't say with absolute certainty. Like, it's the simplification of it is to say that the artists are characters, but
there's probably a thing that happens, like if we were to take whatever, like abstract expressionists as the case study, the dudes that were the most important to the famous dudes, there's like always the famous people, and then the people that were important to the famous people. Well, like the Velvet Underground to all the people that picked up guitars. You know, like with de Kooning, it was what's that Russian guy's name? He was the dude that inspired de Kooning. I'm totally blanking on his name now, because he's not in the school anymore. You know, he's not de Kooning, Pollock, Klein, Newman, Rothko. If those are the five that we remember, Arshil Gorky. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
He was like this huge influence on all those people. Or like how we're watching those 1950s like abstract art in America video series, and one of them's on Jack Tworkov. I think I have the Tworkov book behind me today. And at the time, Tworkov, the way they're talking about him in the movie, he's obviously the king, but he's not the king anymore. Now he's like if you're really interested in abstract expressionism, check out Jack Tworkov. But in 1956, he was the man, but like the story just disappeared. For whatever reason, there's no story.
To bring it to more relevant or current artists that I've seen this happen to in real time, but like Paper Rad, like I think are an example of kind of, I think you and I will remember them, but I don't think younger people know who they are. Like it didn't carry, like for whatever reason. And maybe to a larger extent, maybe as well, like the entire Fort Thunder run.
Yeah, like outside of the lightning bolt guys. Because they have lightning bolt.
Yeah, maybe that's why that won't. And then also, like, I guess, like, Force Field was in the Whitney Biennial. But I've noticed that Paper Rad were something that happened and that were really influential on a lot of different strains of media, including, like, television and just fashion and art and just media and like kind of in an explosive way, but and you can see the influence everywhere, but I think no one knows who they are, like outside of like people that were there for it, that remember it. I don't think it seems to me like something that they're like the Jack Tworkov of that.
Like I don't even know what you would call it, like in terms of like very DIY, very like uneducated looking, even though that wasn't the truth. Yeah, and the influence like certainly on animation.
Yeah,
because I'd see stuff that would come out eventually where you'd be like, oh, that looks like a Fort Thunder thing, and it's got nothing to do with Fort Thunder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think that I don't know why that, but the story, why that doesn't sort of carry through with some, and then others it does. Maybe it has to do with mythologizing. But then again, the thing about, I think with Paper Rad in particular was that they were just very transient's kind of the wrong word, but the correct word, in that they like existed but didn't exist, and it sort of happened, and there was so much ephemera that was produced by the project, if you want to like put it in academic terms, that was just cast off to people either at their like live shows or just given to front. Like, I'm not sure if they really had much market value, and I'm not sure if that has something to do with it. They were pretty rooted in the DIY thing, but the same with Force Field and all that though. So I don't know, but yeah,
it would be interesting to know the extent to which like collectors who take an interest in something then make sure that the storytelling spreads around it. Because it's interesting, because like if we take like say Lightning Bolt, record labels inherently understand this. They don't always do it well or successfully, but the first thing they do if they want you to get to sell records and play shows is they do press for you. They don't always do like the best press or find the best angle, but they fundamentally understand that they need to create a story that gets repeated. And it's even why bands always do dumb shit on like their third album. Like, so we rented an unelectrified cabin in the woods of Vermont and we wrote all these songs with handmade instruments. And you're like, but then somehow we made a record that sounds like our other records. And it's like, you were bored. You actually made a story for yourself to get unbored. I think it's kind of what ends up happening.
Yeah.
But then like in the art world, even though I understand there's press releases are for things like galleries are pushing at that moment, but not so much for like, because like a band even understands the idea that they should probably be doing some sort of press. But I don't know that artists understand that.
Well, I think they started to when they took hold of Instagram in the last 10 years, though, because then maybe this is pretty, I just realized this now, but this is a whole can of worms. But like, I think maybe Instagram became the branding for fine artists and people kind of working and the fringes of the fine art world, like the sort of printed matter, sort of like, I guess we'll just call the entire group like art school graduates or something. But like, that seemed to be a good thing and a bad thing, both for selling work and building careers, from what I noticed, because there were people like Stefan Simkowitz and stuff who were like collectors that only collected off Instagram and were known for it, and we're basically bypassed galleries, and we're basically kind of making artists careers in a weird way quickly. There was a downside to that, though.
Anything quick is going to have a downside.
Oh yeah.
Usually a massive downside.
Yeah, when you always kind of, it's very predictable what it is too, which is just non-sustainability. It's like bands getting signed or something. So, but yeah, I would say like Instagram would be kind of where artists took hold of that. But then the downside of that was the sort of, again, if we're talking about self-mythologizing, I think that like Instagram and self-branding for artists or quote unquote creative types or creatives, whatever they, has become problematic, actually, because it's always a bummer to me when you go to someone's profile that you've respected prior to that, and then you just see kind of what a goober they are on their social media, whether it's just self-branding through like weird pouty selfies, or I'm talking like
yeah, or like when their whole thing shifts from, I feel like this is like what happened when Twitter became a viable thing for people to get famous off of. Usually somebody would be funny on Twitter, like kind of come out of nowhere, be funny on Twitter, then start getting opportunities as a result of that. And now everything they've like posted about became about promoting those opportunities that they got. Like, this is a funny one, but, and I'm trying to remember what year this is. This got to be like 2014, maybe. So a long time ago. But I discovered Aziz Ansari through his Twitter, where he was beefing with IMAX theaters because he was so angry that he'd gone to one of these fake IMAX theaters, and he was tweeting constantly this war on them that they weren't responding to. That was very funny. And then it's like, so then you follow this guy and he's actually super funny. And then you're like, you start to see like, oh, he's like in this movie or whatever. It's like he's shooting this movie and stuff like that. But then when when Parks and Recreation came out and he was on it, I was like, oh, that's that dude I follow on Twitter. You know what I mean? But then like once he was a famous person, then it like completely flipped. And now all it was like me and my cool life.
Oh, right. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or like go watch this thing.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Like, but everybody does it now. Like even on like a small, you want to call it indie level or like whatever. It's just, that's where the downside is. And I'm guilty of it. When I've been trying to hustle my wares, it's part of like branding and stuff, is to kind of cultivate like a story or editorial or lifestyle kind of commentary around whatever you're pitching, whether it's music or merch or whatever. But I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really comfortable even with viewing other people's gooberness as their own self-mythologizing through social media. I don't know what you would call it, but like it's definitely apparent. I could think of examples, but I don't need to, because it's actually so ubiquitous. Like,
it's like my least favorite post that like bands do. Or like, especially like now that there's this whole thing of defunct bands having social media presences, and they'll be like, album number 3 came out on this day 22 years ago. Who remembers? And it's like, shut the up.
Nobody.
Like, why are you doing this? It's like, it's embarrassing. Yeah. Imagine if I was like,
you're right.
Yo,
that's a thing.
22 years ago, I turned 22 on this day. And
dude, like I follow big accounts like Aerosmith and stuff, and Aerosmith does it for their records, and it's only like bands like that where it makes sense. But like, yeah, you're totally right. Like that's a thing like bands do now, and like nobody fucking remembers the release date. Like,
and I mean I hate, it's like funny because like I work in like corporate digital media, so engagement, I don't know what you call it. It's like so important, but it's so embarrassing just to be asking questions that the answers don't matter.
Yeah, and the algorithm probably loves it, but also it probably doesn't hurt to put focus on whatever the record is or whatever there's a self-interest there. They're like, hey, check this out again. By the way, it's on Bandcamp or whatever.
I know. I would actually wish that those bands would just do some self-mythologizing and instead just tell some stories.
And there are stories there for sure. To bring it back relevant to the music thing, could it be argued that labels say like Numero are all about retelling or telling a story and not self-mythologizing, but they're sort of doing like a sort of like a PR move with these. I mean, it sort of started with bands we gave a shit about, and now it's sort of like stuff no one really cared too much about in the first place. Like
some of the stuff they put out is like so just Ken Shipley's Friends from 1994 that like were not bands that had an impact in any way, shape, or form, which is fine as like a labor of love. But you're very correct about that mythologizing, because like here's a good example. We're not going to edit this out. I'm just going to run with it. But Numero put the Frail stuff on streaming, and they published like one of those articles on their website about like the formation of the sound of Frail. Okay. Now, I was going to point out that when Frail were around, there is absolutely zero chance they would have been able to put out a record on Tree, which was Ken Shipley from Numero Group's indie DIY emo label in the 90s. I could be wrong. Maybe he was a huge Frail fan. Based on the output of what that label put out, Frail were never going to get to put out a record on Tree. Not that they necessarily wanted to. So then to be publishing this article, lavishing praise on the influence of Frail, it seems weird. Now, I understand Numero is not just one dude. It's a group of people, and they probably make collective decisions about the importance of, like, well, this thing turned out to be important in retrospect. But I do remember thinking, this is very weird that this is
let me ask you this,
doing this.
Because my memory of Frail, I mean, whether or not, regardless of my opinion of them now, because I liked them at the time, and regardless of my opinion on that or not now, I distinctly remember a key element to Frail in terms of even getting their music released and even the presentation of their music was the label. Kidney Room. Wasn't that kind of like eventually kind of the thing? He did multiple releases with them and they looked a certain way, or was it only one release?
Let's see. I unfortunately can probably detail the entire Frail discography. So the first 7-inch was on Yuletide.
Actually, the first 7-inch is kind of the one I would probably like still more than
the second 7-inch is on Kidney Room. Right. Then there's the split with Elements of Need, which is on Static. And then there's the final 7-inch, which is on Bloodlink.
Oh, okay. So
I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe I know all of that. I tried listening to those Frail records that were on Spotify.
Yeah.
Not an enjoyable experience.
If my memory serves, still screechy, but it became even more unhinged and more unpalatable as the releases came out. Like the first one was almost kind of moshy and kind of, I don't know. It's been a long time.
I think the last one is the best.
The last one's the best.
Yeah.
Okay.
The last one is where it sounds like Swizz. That's where you want every band to eventually do, is get to the thing where they kind of chill out and they do a quasi-Swizz thing. This is what you want all bands to do. Right. Or what I want them to do.
It's a good radio episode because I'm finding out that Mike V is back on Powell and that Numero is doing a Frail, or there's kind of two big sort of items of interest to me for some reason, even though I like Mike V a hell of a lot more than I like Frail. I don't know if you liked them at the time, but
oh dude, I mean, I love them. Now
yeah, we all did.
Insane and clearly had terrible taste in music.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They were kind of the hallmark band of, like, they were hot shit back then. This is the hot take. They came on and they were so big so quickly relatively in an underground scene that it wasn't like Earth Crisis level of, but it was close, and it seemed earth-shattering, and this is like the best shit in the world. But then as you get older and you listen to it again, you go, what the fuck? You were like, was I brainwashed? Like, this is really not good. They're like,
the second time we brought it up, but like that style of vocal,
It's
just
bad.
the worst thing that ever happened.
I think it comes from the Native Nod records, though, right? The Frail dude kind of had like the Native Nod thing, but it was more unhinged and kind of.
Yeah, it was very shaky. It was
I
very
hate that.
frail.
I hate it because like my friend posted about it on Facebook, and it must be because of the Numero thing. He's our age, and he's just like, he was just saying how great they are. And it's just like he's a fan, I guess. Still, he's like they're just the epitome of just going on about them. And then I was thinking as I was having
Well,
coffee
it's funny
this
because they're not
morning.
even an emo band. They're
Well,
basic, like they're like more or less sound not quite, but like Mouthpiece until they sound like Swizz, and then it's fantastic.
except the vocals are just insanely emo, though. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, I always thought. I mean, not always.
But musically,
Eventually,
yeah,
I
you're
thought,
right.
oh yeah, this is Mouthpiece with the dude from Honeywell on vocals. But Native Nod is actually a much better.
It's way more
reference.
unstable. Like, unfortunately, I think Finn McKenty's like used them as like a clip them as an example of just how bad hardcore was back. My joke was during coffee to myself. I guess I'll share it with you. Is that Frail? They could have called them cringe too, because it's just like. Even their name, I remember at the time I was just like, oh, before I actually heard them and decided I did like them, the name was a little off-putting. I was like, this is like a new level of like yucky emo-ness or something. Frail?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a bad name.
I think they were like important because of the shift that they represented. Like that they were straight edge, and they brought in like the emo vocals, or like pioneered them in reality. And then they were straight edge, but they didn't sing about straight edge shit. They were singing about homophobia or like not fitting in. And they were like all little
young,
frail teenagers.
Yeah, they were like our age too.
Yeah,
like
it wasn't like tough guy
younger.
stuff.
Yeah.
So like if you were into hardcore, but you were put off by lots of aspects of it. I think like this is kind of a thing I was getting at in our first episode when I was kind of comparing like the 90s hardcore scene to now. Because like I saw this video today. It was like the singer, I think it's a singer from that band, it's like in the pit, just acting like a complete and total asshole in a way that would have just been like, so in 1994, the band would have stopped playing.
Yeah.
Like that would have been pretty typical. As the band would have been like, like, what's your problem? Why are you the only person that gets to have fun? And in this video, it's like, holy shit, the guy from goes off, but he's just being an asshole. That's all there is to it. But it's completely acceptable. And a lot of the stuff that we listened to at the time that was called hardcore, it wouldn't be called hardcore now, and you wouldn't get like Shotmaker wouldn't play that show that dude is dancing like that at.
Yeah, I feel like sick of it all would have stopped the set 30 years ago, or I think even like harder bands would have, like, it just wasn't like, that's my memory of it. You could go
see Earth Crisis and you were in no danger of getting hurt besides getting crushed. It was so rare that you'd go to shows with like that kind of antics going on. And much less than anybody would tolerate it. You know, like
that's why when
Resurrection, whatever, pretty much only Just to 14.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, at least regionally in New England, yeah, like those are the only shows I remember the floor clearing and shit. But yeah, I think it's just a different time now. I wouldn't know firsthand from going to shows, but like, it's when I do see those clips of like, even like, I feel like I've seen like 108 shows recently where that's sort of the way the pit is. It's gross. It's like, why is it just empty and there's just a few people doing kung fu?
Yeah, why do 3 people get to have fun?
It's not the way I remember hardcore shows, and it's not the way we had fun in the pit or whatever. But I was gonna say, even like newer bands like Mind Force, who I really like because they kind of almost seem like a perfection of a few different things melded together that reminds me of like early 90s sort of in a weird way. You see clips of their shows and their shows look lame.
Yeah, and they're completely encouraging.
They're like tough guys.
A prick. Kind of.
Yeah,
it's so bizarre. I mean, whatever, it is what it is. But you know, it's like when we posted that clip about like the difference between, you know, like a John Hilt's basement show, Rye Coalition plays, people are sitting on the floor or barely moving, you know, and then like Alex Dunham called me after that just to like talk about that. And it was like, it was the overcorrection, that like 90s sitting on the floor thing. That's essentially the abolition, maybe DC thing. It was this overcorrection to the tough guy dancing. But the problem was it also sucked. So then, instead of there being a middle ground, how can we dance, but make it that everybody can dance? It just went back to 4 or 5 guys get to beat up everyone. Sitting on the floor thing seemed cool at the time because there was no chance you were getting punched in the face by some jackass.
Yeah, that shit, I mean, there's always violence at shows and stuff, but it just seems so acceptable now from what I've seen. That
yeah. And I guess like coming from someone like Alex, that makes even more sense because like it was playing these shows with like Youth of Today and Judge and shit. Those shows were insane. So like then to go to DC and whatever, I don't fucking know who's playing, Jawbox, and everybody's kind of sitting down or just like it's just sort of nodding their head, like observing. It probably was a breath of fresh air to be like, oh good, no one is getting knocked out.
Yeah. It was an interesting, all I had to do was change scenes in Boston because I think Boston hardcore shows are pretty rowdy, and then you just turn 18 and you start going to TT the Bears instead and just seeing karate instead, and everybody
you go teach in a 44 and it's like you can move around.
That's it. That's all you have
Worst
to do.
thing that happens is you bump into someone or they bump into you and someone spills a little bit of beer.
Yeah, it would change the scene. But yeah, that's all I guess you had to do because I mean Boston hardcore shows I think are they sort of because it's like where FSU's from, I guess. But
and there was like the Shelter Riot show and
known
like that, and people getting knocked out and stuff. Yeah, it's true.
So I guess they always were, but I don't like the thing of it being made normal to just the kung fu shit. Although that existed back then too, but we all like pointed it out, and those dudes were like ostracized. At least our band shows.
Were like dudes trying to do that stuff, and other people being so intolerant of it. Like the person trying to do that stuff would get punched or kicked or whatever, and they'd storm out upset that they couldn't do this completely disruptive and annoying thing that they wanted to do.
Well, I'm making a completely blanket judgment, but it does seem like that's what hardcore shows are like. At least at the shows of bands that I like, that I've seen like clips of, like again, it's like being back on social media, like Mind Force, or just seeing like, yo, thanks for coming out. Like you name the city and you see it, and it just looks like a bummer. Like it's like that doesn't look like
a bummer. I routinely I'm like, oh, not going to that. I guess I'm gonna stick to going to like, I don't know, weirdo metal shows like Today's Day or whatever. Like,
that's actually not like that. Because it's just the hardcore stuff maybe, but I don't know what it was about being all squished and piled up in a pit with people as a kid that worked for me with the music, but it was part of the draw at a certain point as like a young hardcore person.
Yeah, you're all like
you're part of the thing
together.
It's like a gospel or something.
Like you didn't care too much if you're like up front at like Mouthpiece, Sing Along Central, and somebody like kind of jumps up behind you.
Deal with it.
Yeah,
it's not a big
deal.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like the stage diving and getting kicked in the face was annoying, but like kind of getting like crushed, that's fine. That dude wants to sing Can We Win or whatever. He should he should be on top of my head right now so that he can sing along to Mouthpiece.
I definitely had my injuries. They were accidents though. One of them being Tim McMahon stepping on my face in Worcester and like busting my, like I was fine, but I got a bloody nose from it that just like burst open. So it might have been, I wonder if it was during Can We Win? Just during one of the like build-ups to the sing along. But yeah, there's something about it, I think, with hardcore that is like a almost like religious experience for kids or people. I think at a certain point you gotta outgrow, or do you outgrow it?
I think you're very weird if you don't outgrow it.
That's what I think too. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you lose that for live music because there is that in live music, but the part of
like needing to make it about you.
Yeah.
Like I remember
at age 40, any age over, I don't know what the cutoff should be.
So we moved out to Minneapolis in 2000. So I was living in Newport. You know, so if I wanted to see a show, it was always no exception. Like drive 45 minutes to Providence, or drive an hour and 10-20 minutes to Boston, or like when Studio 158 was popping, drive like again like another hour 10 minutes, hour 20 minutes to Connecticut. So like everything was always far away. And when we moved to Minneapolis, the idea of driving 10 minutes straight from our dorms to downtown Minneapolis to go see shows, like we used to go to so many shows because it was like, why wouldn't you? But I remember like going to a lot of stuff where you going to see like Cannibal Ox and LP, and it was like, I just knew that all I wanted to do was hear the Cannibal Ox beats painfully loud. Like that was my intention. Like I didn't, like I don't need to be doing like throw your hands in the air, all the like corny shit that rappers do that like to make up for being bad at performing. I just wanted to hear those like LP beats as loud as hell. And I think like a lot of times like going to stuff like going to like a drawbacks reunion, that shit was way too long. But I just wanted to hear what's the one Jawbox song that everyone likes, including me?
From Savory.
Savory. I just wanted to hear Savory. Like if they had played Savory first, I probably would have done the asshole thing of left. I would have been like,
really?
oh, good. Like, see, I just wanted to hear that loud.
I like them. There's only one record I really like by them. So, and that song, I think I've heard it a lot, or for some reason. Did it get a lot of like radio airplay? Because it was sort of on a.
It was like it was a single. Like there was a video. And it got played on
video
like
too. So
whatever. It got played on like 120 minutes and probably like Beavis and Butthead.
It made its rounds back then enough for me to hear it a lot. I don't really dig it.
People cover it too. Because like I remember
they do that
playing it when I was a teacher, like just as part of like whatever we were listening to in class that day. And someone was like, what is this? I thought this was the Deftones. And I was like, what? And yeah, it was like, it turned out like the Deftones had released a cover of that song at some point.
I hate the Deftones.
The person didn't know it was a cover. That was pretty awesome. I think we used to have like a rule, like on like in some of my classes when I would teach, would just be like, all right, someone tell us something to listen to. So it would be all over the place because you might go from like Mogwai to Imagine Dragons. It's funny because I was thinking of, again, like the storytelling thing, because I think like, when did it come out? I guess it came out like day before yesterday. Ethan Loy had a new video part up on Thrasher. Ethan Loy's the best. He's incredible. But he's got like no board sponsor. I think Element maybe cut their whole team or something, or maybe they cut him, but he was on Element. He went pro for Element a couple years ago. He's like super inventive but gnarly. He's kind of like Spanky, doing very weird stuff, but
love that. Yeah,
at a level that's like hard to comprehend. Like, so you're watching this part. If you haven't seen it yet, it's incredible. But he does all kinds of wild stuff that just sort of doesn't make sense. Then you see him at those brick quarter pipes in LA.
Oh yeah,
once, and you're like, oh shit, because it's, you can tell the video's almost over. You're like, he's about to do something insane. Because like what's left to do at that place? You know what I mean? Right. Like everything's been done. And then sure enough, he does something mind-blowing at that spot, which I'm not going to spoil, but it was like you're by yourself and you go, oh, fuck, how is that possible? Like one of those levels. But he's one of these people that's like, he's never fully got on Adidas, but there's tons of people on Adidas that like, they haven't even put out one really good video part, but they have like some level of equity or whatever. Like, and then you have this other dude who's been flow for Adidas for like 5 years, repping Adidas super hard, like making the shoes look incredible. And then he's like not fully on. He doesn't even have a board sponsor. And you're like, okay, well, I guess that means he's not marketable. Like there's no story to tell about this dude, which is depressing. It just makes me sad.
I think the skateboarding industry seems, there's so many more people that now than there used to be. It's so much bigger than it used to be too. So I just wonder, with music being oversaturated, if it's just difficult to get your voice to be heard.
No, it's totally oversaturated. And think about how weird it is too. Like imagine if to get on a record label, you didn't just have to get the owner or the A&R to like your music and like you enough to support you. But imagine if what you had to do to get on was go on tour with every band on the label and have all of them love you, love your music, and love being around you before you could actually do a record. If they were like, you do demos on your own time, but then come tour with literally every single band on the label. And if that works out, maybe in 2 years you can put out a record on the label. Like that would be insane. But like that's 100% how skateboarding works. Like with Spanky, for example, because he's been on Baker since he was, I don't know, like he went pro. He was 16 or 15, right? So he'd probably been on Baker since he was 13 or 14. So to get on Baker, you have to be a little kid that other people can not only tolerate but like to be around. Your skateboarding is why they pay attention, but then the rest of it entirely comes down to, can these people stand to be around you, or do they enjoy to be around you? And especially Baker's, like Andrew Reynolds is like talent scout par excellence, you know what I mean, of like finding these like teenagers, really young teenagers, and being able to recognize that they're going to turn into something special if you can keep them from turning into or drug addicts or whatever. But like what a weird thing. Your career is dependent on a big group of people wanting to spend time with you. But yeah, the oversaturation thing, I don't know what it's closest to, whether it's being like a musician or a visual artist. It might be even closer to being a visual artist, in that you're working on like essentially one big project every 2 years maybe, and then this constant stream of sketches in terms of like clips, or in terms of like being in a tour video or something like that. Like you're generating all this little tiny stuff while you're trying to work on this like one statement that your career needs you to be able to ride off of for a little bit.
Yeah, it's weird though, because it's all contingent upon what your level of skating is at the moment, which you got to keep at a super high. It's insane. So like that aspect of it actually seems nuts to me, and it's for pretty young, dedicated skaters. I keep thinking of like one of my other points I wanted to make about skateboarding, but like it kind of related to like that Molotov deck I sent you. And it kind of gave me a memory of a very different kind of time in skateboarding, when it was anything but saturated. It was small in the early 90s comparative to how it is now. And then on the fringes of it, what kind of captured my attention for a moment were these sort of DIY sort of bedroom companies that were doing shit sort of like, I was just thinking of this other side of skateboarding. It's partly that, but then it's also like maybe skating and companies have come back around to it, where I don't know. It's sort of interesting to me that there aren't more like, I guess it's like a skateboard deck. Somebody's name on the deck should in a way be the artist, not the skater. It's the idea. Like your level of being able to sort of have that honors in some way. I was thinking of more along the lines of like skateboard companies that weren't modeled on the pro ranking model.
Well, it's funny because there's never been that many.
Yeah,
and they never last. They've always existed,
and they go away.
Yeah, because like back in the day there was Planet X. Is that what it's called? Planet X. There was this brand I remember. They had like kind of a Vision vibe, and they had no pros. They would advertise like in Thrasher and stuff like that.
Was it old? Way back?
Yeah. This is like late 80s.
Brand X, and they were associated with Toxic Wheels, I think.
Yeah, Brand X. That's what it was.
I think they're back now.
I'm trying to remember if he was doing it. I know that like some of Michael Sieben's brands, Michael Sieben being like one of the editors at Thrasher, and then he did a brand called Roger. Their focus was on iconic boards that they didn't really want to go out of print. So they had one that had like an upside down cross, and it said "Skate Switch for Jesus." So if you skated Switch, it was a cross. Right. And like another one that was like Roger, and it had a giant pot leaf and then a pizza, and I think it said 80%. was it like 80% pizza and weed, 20% ninja stars or something like that? And then
Right.
it's just like whatever stuff he was into, like whatever dumb ideas. But the thing was like they weren't doing like seasonal decks. It was like
Right.
they'd make a graphic and then the plan was just to make the graphic until they didn't need to make it anymore, rather
Yeah.
than like, because you know, skateboarding like in the pre 2008, before like the financial meltdown, the like number of boards each pro would get, there'd be like so many boards with their names on them. And if you think about like what quasi does now, it's like each dude gets one board per quarter
Season.
or something like that.
Yeah.
There's maybe one or two team boards, but there's not like two or three different boards that just say quasi on them. And then Tyler Bledsoe gets 3 boards and Dick Rizzo gets 4 and somebody else gets 2. It's like everybody just gets one board that the company put effort into. So it kind of already feels like a shift towards like doing something a bit more meaningful.
Right. I guess it has always existed. And to be honest, it's not always. It does kind of come off corny sometimes as a pitch, but it's also, I think, because of how much bigger the industry is. So it's hard for it to have that special kind of thing to it. You know, to that end, though, like when Alien Workshop started, that was the vibe they had, honestly. The very beginning of Alien Workshop felt like one of these, also because they were in Ohio.
Yeah.
It felt it had that indie kind of feel to it.
But I think maybe there's an aspect to it too, which is that like it might have felt very visual art oriented, but it was still, as skateboarding is to this day, essentially influencer marketing. It always has been. It probably always will be.
So you got to have a name attached to it.
Yeah,
like
yeah. So it's like,
pro
you know,
skater.
so like when Workshop it was popping, the ads were, you know, super crazy, but at the same time, that board says Dwayne Petrie, that board says Rob Dyrdek. But I think like they had a hot team of all the dudes they took with them from GNS.
GNS. Yeah.
Steve Clark, I think.
Their whole
and
early team was all
Scott
the
Conklin.
GNS guys.
Yeah, yeah, right.
They were, I think, a super DIY kind of thing at the start, you know, and that I don't know. There's something that resonates with me about the spirit of, I guess they're a better example because they were sort of not art, especially in the very beginning, a very heavily art directed sort of complete thing, because it was not just the ads, it was like the video, like memory screen and the graphics and just the overall sort of vibe of it was way more art school than any other company, I think, at the time, to put it in really broad terms.
And like with GNS, it wasn't front and center. You know what I mean? Like Neil Blender was doing his stuff, but the first Chris Miller graphic was almost like something that could have been on Vision. And Chris Miller hated that graphic. And so it was like GNS was like all over the place. Like it's like we remember now in retrospect footage and the Neil Blender graphics. But the reality is that it was just this chunk. But then once those guys had Alien Workshop, now the whole aesthetic is Neil Blender and footage. And then there's that idea of like wanting to do things that make you think. Like even if just thinking what the fuck, which is interesting, is that was maybe the one other angle to take, even though they probably weren't really at war with Rocco. But like Rocco's like whole thing is like eventually, at first it was to be funny. Then it was confrontation or war or whatever. And then with Alien Workshop, it was like introspective, but
well, they're skating,
trying to get you to think.
Yeah, well, they were also not in California, you know, so I'm trying to remember, was their team scattered across the country or were they all Midwest people? Like, because I know Dyrdek was Ohio, Petrie's New Orleans.
How many of them were from Ohio? I wonder if it's just Dyrdek, because they eventually send him to San Diego and to have like a house with all the Workshop guys so they could film. That's how Dwayne Petrie ruins his skateboarding career, because he moves to San Diego and basically starts a gravity band instead of skateboarding.
Oh yeah, he just went into music.
Yeah, because he did that band Camera Obscura. What was Camera Obscura on? Trouble Man?
Oh, was it? Yeah, I think I remember
GSL.
that. Oh, GSL, yeah. So it was like
Yeah, he started that band or joined that band, and that's like part of the his I don't play guitar, I don't skateboard, I just sit in my room in the Alien Workshop house and play guitar all day.
Right. I know. Well, I didn't know. I didn't know about that. That's what happened when I moved to California. Yeah, workshops an interesting study though, because I think they, in some weird way, they still have the integrity of the. It's not the same vibe that it.
I think is like an interesting thing of like the thing with the collabs and how much you have to sort of swallow to be like, this is cheesy, but you doing this lets you pay these people. You know, like a Habitat is like always doing Pink Floyd,
Yeah. Really.
NASA, and Twin
Really.
Peaks stuff. And like
Oh.
I have a feeling that like the like Twin Peaks boards is like why Habitat can pay their team.
Yeah, and people, you got to remember, people are stupid. So if you give them like a, like to me, it's I'm looking out. I'll come up with an example right now, like, and I bet it would sell like hotcakes if I could get the licensing on it. Like a Smiths, like the Queen is Dead, like with the iconic cover, like on a deck. It's like the Joy Division thing or something. I think that's a stupid thing. I would never buy it. It's cheesy. It denigrates the album. Just in general, I think what you were saying about Habitat. They got somebody that can secure the licensing to certain things like that.
So I assume 90% of that product doesn't go to skateboarders. It gets sold to like people who collect stuff or want a set of like Twin Peaks boards on the wall and it looks cool or whatever.
Yeah,
You know what I think is interesting about the like collab stuff is that Powell doesn't do the collabs, but Powell doesn't because all Powell has to do is collab with itself. It goes Steve Caballero
Powell.
board from 1987. Boom.
Yeah,
$1 million
Powell's in
or
a
however
rare,
much they sell.
yeah, Powell's in a rare position of having all like these super iconic decks.
Which I think is what Workshop 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever it is now, where it's like a very, in large part, a very pure expression of pre-Don Pendleton Workshop. Like the Spectrum boards, the brainwashing, Exalt the New God, like all that stuff. Like because like for a lot of people, the classic era of Workshop is the Don Pendleton era. Right. Which is like some of the best skateboard graphics ever done, period. And they literally fired him or laid him off because Mike Hill wanted Workshop to look more like Workshop and less like Don Pendleton. The way that they do stuff, it's not that dissimilar to Powell, which is they just lean into their legacy. People get new graphics like Joey Guevara or Yage or whoever. So like they do make new graphics, but I'm guessing the bulk of where they're making money is on that visitor photo board or the brain transplant board or whatever, all those like kind of classic workshop boards. Yeah, legacy workshop boards.
Well, that's the word I would buy. I mean, I think I almost did buy at one point. They did do a reprint of, and it was a classic, like early '90s shape of just like not. I don't think it says Believe. It has the alien. It's like the classic.
I like that, like the making the Exalt the New God with the smartphone was a very smart move. Like, I mean, it's obvious, like replacing the TV with the phone, but still.
Yeah, definitely.